The orbital station Harmony hung like a perfect jewel against the deep green of the world below. It was a place of quiet curves and soft light, where water flowed in channels beside the walkways. Commander Vral stood at the large viewing window, his 4 long fingers resting on the cool glass. Below, the continents of the human world, once called Terra, were a patchwork of orderly farms and gentle, sprawling cities. No smoke rose. No lights of conflict flickered. It was the picture of peace. His companion, Sub-Commander Keiichi, gestured dismissively at the scene. "You see? A docile garden. All the stories, the ancient fear. It is myth, dust." KTH was young for his rank, his carapace still glossy. He had studied the Great Pacification, but only from data slates. He had not been there, that VRAL did not look away from the planet. A deep scar, long-healed, ached on his shoulder where a piece of human shrapnel still rested near the bone. What you see is not docility, KH. It is a choice. They chose this peace after we shattered their fleets, after we burned their capital. Kathith's voice held the heat of certainty. They chose survival. There is a difference. The oldest rule in the galaxy, don't rouse the humans, and we proved it was just a warning for the weak. We roused them, and we put them down. Their empire is ash. Now they tend our gardens. Vral finally turned. His large, dark eyes held a weight Kate H. could not fathom. You misunderstand the rule. It was never about their weapons, which were fierce, or their ships, which were tough. It was about the fire inside them. We did not put it out. We offered them a bucket of water, and they, seeing their children would burn, took it and poured it on themselves. The embers are still warm. Do not blow on them. On the planet below, in the city that had once been a capital, a woman named Yuna walked through the memorial gardens. The gardens were a condition of the surrender, a place for humans to remember the Kaldari believed would keep them calm. Yuna was a historian, or she had been. Now she simply tended the archives, a quiet keeper of quiet stories. She moved past the great stone plinths with names of battles, past the silent fountains. Her destination was a secluded corner, shielded by a fallen column covered in flowering vines. Here, the soil was different. She knelt, her hands, rough from real soil, brushing away leaves. A small woody plant grew here with thin green needles. Rosemary, an earth herb. It was not native to this world. Bringing non-approved biomatter was a violation, a serious one. Yuna did not smile as she tended it. Her face, framed by dark hair streaked with gray, was a mask of calm acceptance. But her eyes, as she pinched a needle and breathed in its sharp, piney scent, held a universe of memory. This smell was her secret rebellion. It smelled of home, of a kitchen, of a life before the ash. Back on Harmony, KTH was reviewing planetary compliance reports. They were perfect. Productivity was optimal. Energy consumption was efficient. It was, to him, boring. A thought, dangerous and prideful, took root. Vral's caution was the caution of the old, the defeated. The Kaldari dominion was supreme. It was time to erase the last shadows of Myth. He found the report easily. An elder human male, a former logistics coordinator named Lee, had been discovered in possession of a forbidden artifact, a pre-war military medal, the Order of Terra for valor. It was a simple piece of metal and ribbon. The punishment was re-education. KTH altered the command. He set the punishment to public termination. The reason field, he typed, for ideological contamination and glorification of defunct aggression. He did not inform Vral. This would be a lesson, a final proof. He would broadcast it to the sector. Let them see the might of the Dominion. and the absolute submission of humanity. The announcement flashed across public data feeds in the city. Yuna saw it on a passing public screen. Her blood, which had flowed slow and cold for years, turned to ice. She saw the name, Lee. She knew him. A kind man who spoke of his grandchildren. His crime was a piece of memory. She did not cry out. She did not run. She walked deliberately back to her secluded garden corner. She knelt. The calm mask on her face cracked, not into grief, but into something else. Something older. Her fingers found a sprig of rosemary. She clenched her fist around it. The sharp, fragrant needles dug into her palm, the oil releasing that old smell of earth. The screen in the garden's plaza was large. A crowd had gathered, a mix of humans and Kaldari overseers. The humans stood silently, their faces blank, their eyes downcast or fixed on the screen without expression. It was the look they had perfected, the look of not seeing. Lee was brought out. He looked small, confused. He was not a warrior. He was an old man who kept a token from his brother. A Kaldari enforcer read the sentence in a flat, mechanical tone. Yuna watched from her knees, her hands still clenched. She saw the blank faces of her people. She saw the young Kaldari warriors, like Keiichi, standing tall, assured. She saw the disinterest, the routine nature of it. This was not just an execution. It was a message. You are nothing. Your past is nothing. Your memory is dust. As the energy weapon hummed and flashed on the screen, a collective, almost imperceptible flinch went through the human crowd. A single shared intake of breath. Then silence. On the screen, it was over. In her garden, Yuna unclenched her fist. The crushed rosemary was a green stain on her skin. She brought her palm to her face and breathed in the shattered scent. The fire of Raoul had spoken of, the embers he warned were warm, did not just glow. They roared to life. It was not a hot fire, not of rage, but a cold, clear, and terrifying flame of absolute certainty. The blankness was gone from her eyes. They were sharp, focused, alive with a purpose she had buried for half a lifetime. She looked at the sky, past the orbital jewel of harmony, to the cold stars beyond. She spoke a single word, a name, into the fragrant, stained quiet of her hands. It was not a plea. It was an activation signal, a declaration. Jun. In his office on Harmony, Commander Vral watched the broadcast's aftermath. He saw the human crowd disperse, silent and orderly. He saw the perfect compliance. And a chill, deeper than any spaceborne vacuum, settled into his bones. He had seen humans quiet before, after a great loss, just before a great storm. Their silence was not surrender. It was the drawing of a breath. He looked at the planet, so green, so peaceful. He thought of the ancient rule, broken today not by war, but by arrogance. He knew, with a certainty that made his scar throb, what that single sparking ember might ignite. The empire of ash was about to be stirred, and from ash, phoenixes were said to rise. The silence in the human city was heavier the next day. It was a physical thing, a blanket that seemed to muffle the sounds of speeders and the distant hum of orbital shuttles. People went to work. They shopped. They obeyed. But their movements were precise, almost mechanical, and their eyes, which usually looked at the ground, now seemed focused on something very far away. In the central data hub of the planetary network, a man named Min worked. He was a technician, a role the Kaldari trusted him with because he was quiet, efficient, and showed no interest in anything but his circuits and conduits. His hands, stained with slight marks from electro-grease, moved with sure, methodical motions. He was in his 40s, his hair cut short, his face a map of calm concentration. Today, The network was experiencing glitches, minor, irritating things. The public lighting in Sector 7 had come on an hour early. The tram system in the capital had a scheduling error that caused a 15-minute delay. A water reclamation filter in the agricultural district had run a redundant cleaning cycle, wasting energy. Sub-Commander K. Thieth, monitoring from orbit, saw the reports. He scoffed. See? Aging infrastructure. They let their systems decay. Their peace is a decay. He ordered routine diagnostics. He felt no worry, only a reinforced sense of superiority. Min was assigned to fix the lighting error. He rode a silent maintenance lift into the bowels of the city, into a room humming with power relays and optic cables. He opened an access panel. His eyes scanned the problem. It was a simple code fault in a timing chip. A Kaldari engineer would have replaced the chip. Min studied it. He took a small tool from his belt, not a standard issue one, but a slender probe he had made himself. He inserted it into a diagnostic port. His hands moved on a tiny keypad. He was not just fixing the code. He was rewriting a small part of it. He buried a string of data, a packet of information so small it was like a single grain of sand on a beach, deep within the normal repair protocols. The lights in Sector 7 snapped off, then back on, now on their correct schedule. The system registered the repair as complete and successful. Min moved to the next job, the tram delay. Again, he found a faulty logic processor. Again, he fixed the presenting problem. And again, he left his tiny, hidden grain of sand within the new, clean code. Each repair was perfect. Each system ran better than before. And each one now carried a secret. That night, Min did not go to the communal housing block. He walked, without hurry, through the dimmer sections of the city, places where the Kaldari decorative lights did not reach. He descended a set of rusting stairs into an old sublevel, a place marked for eventual demolition. He moved a loose section of wall panel and stepped into a small shielded room. The air was cool and still. A single terminal, built from scavenged parts and older, human technology, sat on a table. The screen was dark. Min did not sit. He stood before it and waited. He did not wait long. The door slid quietly open, and Yuna entered. She carried no light, but her eyes had adjusted to the dark. She saw Min's silhouette against the faint glow of a power indicator. They did not greet each other. There were no words of hello. Yuna spoke first, her voice low and clear in the sealed room. He broke the rule. Min nodded once. His voice, when it came, was as quiet and steady as his hands. The signal is sent. The path is clear. June is waiting. There was no celebration, no relief, only a grim acknowledgement. For 50 years, they had lived this lie. They had accepted oversight, dismantled their great ships, and allowed their history to be renamed the Pacification. They had done it to survive, but survival was not living, and the one rule had been their last fragile shield. Now it was shattered. What did you use? Yuna asked, looking at the terminal. The repair protocols, Min said. Every system I fix today will broadcast a piece of the packet. The Kaldari scan for large data bursts for weapons fire. They do not scan their own maintenance logs for old poems. He entered a command. On the screen, lines of data flickered. It was not military code. It was a string of numbers, yes, but at its heart, it was a simple message. It was a series of coordinates, a time index, and a single phrase, repeated like a heartbeat. The sleeper must wake. This was the failsafe. Not a hidden army. Not a doomsday weapon. A signal. When the humans surrendered, they had not hidden the fleet. They had retired it. They believed or hoped it would never be needed again. But they were not fools. They knew the galaxy was a harsh place, so they left a watchman. And they left a trigger. The trigger was the one rule. As long as the rule was respected, the humans would be peaceful gardeners. If the rule was broken, the watchman would be called Da-Chun was the watchman, Yuna's brother. Officially, he had died in the final battle, his ship lost with all hands. In truth, his ship, crippled and bleeding air, had limped to a prearranged coordinate, a dead system, a quarantined asteroid belt littered with the ghostly shells of ancient human outposts. A place everyone had forgotten. Min finished his work. The terminal screen went dark. It is done. The signal is in the wild. It will repeat, bouncing through their own communication grids until it finds the path out. It cannot be stopped without shutting down their entire planetary network. They will not do that. They need the lights to stay on. Yuna placed a hand on the cold terminal. She thought of Jun, alone for 50 years. She thought of the crushing silence he must have lived in. A living ghost, guarding a tomb of old weapons. He will be ready, she whispered, more to herself than to Min. He has been ready every day, Min replied. He looked at Yuna. The calm technician was gone. In his eyes was the same cold fire she felt in her own heart. Now we wait. And we prepare here. Keiichi thinks he is teaching us a lesson. Soon he will learn his own. Back on Harmony, Commander Vral felt a deep unease. The glitches were minor, but their timing was. Curious, he requested the repair logs. He saw Min's identification code on several. Competent, fast work. Too fast? He looked at the planet below, so quiet, so dark. He remembered the silence of the crowd after the execution. It was the silence before the thunder. He tried to contact KH, to urge caution, to suggest a review of the human technical class. But KH was unavailable, celebrating his assertion of dominance with his junior officers. Vrayal stood at his window, looking down at the dark side of the planet. Somewhere down there, in that sleeping world, a single silent phrase was, traveling through the wires in the air, a whisper in the machine. The sleeper must wake. And he knew, with a dread that turned his blood cold, that something had just begun to stir in the ashes. The signal was a whisper in the void. It traveled for days along forgotten civilian relay channels, bouncing through automated mining probes and derelict communication buoys, a ghost in the machine. Finally, it slipped through the sensor net surrounding a quarantined star system, a place marked on charts as a navigational hazard. The system was a graveyard of stone and ice. At its heart, hidden within the largest asteroid, was a door. The signal reached the door. It was a simple lock, made of physical steel and old, patient technology. A green light glowed once. Deep within the asteroid, in a chamber that had been silent for 5 decades, a console hummed to life. Screens flickered, casting a pale blue light on a figure seated in a heavy command chair. The man's name was Jun. He was older now. His hair white, his face lined not with age, but with the weight of endless, silent vigilance. He wore a simple gray uniform, faded and patched. He opened his eyes. They were not the eyes of someone waking from sleep. They were the eyes of someone who had never been allowed to truly rest. He looked at the console. The message was brief. Coordinates, a timestamp, and the phrase, "The sleeper must wake." Jun did not smile. He did not weep. He placed a weathered hand flat on the console. The metal was cold. He breathed in the stale, recycled air of his tomb. "I am here," he said to the empty room. Then, louder, his voice gaining a strength unused for years, he spoke to the waiting darkness. "Sleepers, wake." The asteroid was not a base. It was a museum. Jun walked through colossal vaults, his footsteps echoing. Here, under soft, dormant lights, stood the giants of a lost age. Not polished and ready for war, but stilled like exhibits. A Jupiter-class dreadnought, Its massive hull, stripped of its primary weapons, rested on colossal cradles. Its name, unyielding, was barely visible under a layer of fine dust. In another bay lay the skeletal frame of a sun-fang plasma lance, disconnected from its power source, a silent dragon's tooth. Chun's cum unit crackled. A voice, synthesized and calm, spoke. Sentinel Jun. Authentication confirmed. Fail-safe protocol activated. What is your command? Begin reactivation sequence. Core Theta, Jun said, his voice steady. Priority, forge and fabricator units. We are not starting an engine. We are rebuilding a heart. Across the vault, ancient machinery groaned. Massive arms, idle for decades, stirred. Sparks flew in the darkness as automated forges began to heat. Jun walked to a viewport. He looked out at the other asteroids in the belt. Each one was not just a rock. Each was a part of the whole. One housed dormant AI cores. Another held seed banks for munitions. Another, the patterns for every ship and weapon humanity had ever retired. A memory flashed, sharp and clear. Himself and Yuna, younger, their uniforms crisp. They stood on the bridge of a ship, watching their homeworld burn on a screen. The Kaldari ultimatum was playing. Lay down your arms. Dismantle your war machine. Submit to oversight, and your species will be allowed to continue. Yuna's face was streaked with soot and tears. We can still fight, Jun. We can take them into the dark with us. Jun had looked at the data, at the losses, at the billions already gone. He had looked at his sister's face. No, he said, the word tasting like ash. We will lay down our swords, but we will not forget how to forge them. If they are ever needed again, someone must remember. I will remember. I will be here. Back in the present, the forge fire grew brighter, painting Chun's determined face in orange light. Rebuilding would be slow. This was not a hidden fleet waiting to fly. It was a pile of legendary parts, and he was one man with a museum of ghosts. On the green world below, Sub-Commander Keich was not idle. The quiet obedience of the humans, instead of satisfying him, now irritated him. It was like a silence that mocked him. He wanted a reaction. He wanted them to bow. He announced a new decree, the Cultural Unification Edict. The human memorials, he declared, were relics of a violent past. They fostered incorrect thought. They would be removed. The order went out. Bulldozers and energy grapples, operated by Kaldari workers, were sent to the great memorial gardens at the heart of the capital. They would start with the central plinth. The stone of names. The news spread. This time, the human silence was different. It was a listening silence. Yuna heard it in the streets. Min heard it in the data hub, seeing the official work orders flash across his screen. On the morning of the demolition, a crowd gathered. Not a protesting crowd. A watching crowd. They stood at the edges of the garden. Men, women, and children, their faces still. Yuna walked through them. She did not push. They parted for her, a sea of quiet people. She walked to the center, right to the base of the stone of names. Where the first bulldozer was poised. She carried no weapon. She carried a simple data slate. A Kaldari foreman approached, his clicking language harsh. Step aside, human. This structure is condemned. Yuna looked past him, at the machine, at the watching eyes of her people. She activated the slate. She did not amplify her voice. She spoke in a normal tone, but in the stillness it carried. You broke the one rule, she said, not to the foreman, but to the sky, to the orbiting station where Kathith watched. You think our memory is weak. You are wrong. She tapped the slate. It was not a complex hack. It was a simple broadcast on an old, low-frequency channel, a frequency every human child was told stories about. The frequency of the lost fleets, her voice. Calm and clear, went out across the city, and then, boosted by 100 hidden repeaters Min had prepared, across the planet and into space. The rule is broken, she said. Remember, in homes, in streets, in factories, humans stopped. They heard it. A shopkeeper dropped a tool. A driver let her vehicle slow to a halt. A mother in a park looked up from her child, her eyes wide. They remembered. They remembered the stories not of defeat, but of who they were before. They remembered the smell of earth air, the sound of their own songs, the feel of tools that built starships. They remembered pride, and they remembered the promise. If the rule is broken, the watching crowd did not riot. They did not shout, but their posture changed. The slump of submission straightened, just a little. The downcast eyes rose, and they looked at the Kaldari machines, and then passed them to the sky. On Harmony, KTH watched the feed. He saw the one woman, the silent crowd. He sneered. A final whisper, pathetic. He ordered the foreman to continue in the asteroid belt. Jun watched too. A small, secondary screen showed the broadcast from the planet. He saw his sister older, standing before the machine. He saw the change in the crowd. He saw the fire rekindling. He turned from the screen to his forge. The first new part, a housing for a primary power coil, was cooling. It glowed with inner heat. They remember, sister, he said to the image on the screen. Now, we remind the galaxy what they are remembering. He opened a full cum channel to the awakening A is in the vault. All systems. Increase priority. The time for quiet is over. The Museum of Ghosts began to stir, not with memory, but with purpose. The planet did not erupt in flames. It did not ring with battle cries. Instead, it became perfectly, maddeningly polite. It was a new kind of war, fought not with guns, but with rules. It began in the logistics hub. A young woman named Sue worked there. Her job was to route supply containers from the orbital elevators to the surface depots. She was very good at her job. The morning after Yuna's broadcast, Sue arrived early. She looked at the day's manifest. She studied the Yaldari routing protocols, which were very detailed and very strict. She began her work. She followed every rule. Exactly. A container of medical gel was needed in the northern city. The protocol said it must be scanned 3 times, logged in 2 separate systems, and assigned a temperature-controlled transport. Sue did this, but the only temperature-controlled transport available was on the other side of the continent. She waited for it. The medical gel sut. The request from the northern city grew more urgent. Sue filed a form asking for a protocol exemption to use a standard transport. She waited for the approval. It did not come. The gel spoiled. In the energy grid control center, a man named Tay, who had fixed generators his whole life, watched a pressure reading creep into the yellow zone. The protocol said to initiate a gradual power down of the sector to prevent overload. It was a safe, conservative measure. Tay initiated it. The power down caused a cascade in 4 other sectors, which their protocols also forced into safe mode. A quarter of the city went dark. Productivity stopped. Tay filed his report, noting he had followed procedure perfectly. It was like this everywhere. Every human worker, from sanitation to starship maintenance, began to execute their duties with robotic, by-the-book precision. There was no sabotage, no broken machines. Only perfect adherence to the Kaldari zone, often cumbersome, rules. The result was a creeping paralysis. Supply chains seized. Energy flickered. Communications were delayed by layers of mandatory encryption, and logging. Min moved among them, a ghost in the data streams. He did not cause the problems. He guided them. He sent a subtle nudge here, a redirected form there, ensuring each perfect, lawful action caused the maximum amount of silent chaos. The system was choking on its own red tape, and the humans were dutifully feeding it more. On Harmony, Sub-Commander K2H. Reports piled up. Nothing was broken, yet nothing worked. Laziness. Incompetence. He shouted. He ordered punishments. But you cannot punish someone for following the rules. The human supervisors, when questioned, simply showed their perfect logs. Commander Vral watched, his dread turning to a cold, hard understanding. This was not incompetence. This was a strategy. A calculated, collective strategy. The embers were not just glowing. They were directing their heat with frightening intelligence. In the communication suite of Harmony, a young Kaldari officer named Hana listened to the chaos. She was different. She had been hatched and raised on this human world. The sounds of the human language were as familiar to her as the clicking of her own tongue. She had human friends as a child. She understood their quiet humor. Their deep ties to memory got curious and worried. She accessed the deep archives. She searched for the original reports on the one rule. She bypassed the official summaries, finding the raw, after-action reports from the Great Pacification. She read the words of Kaldari warriors, now old or dead. Their words were not proud. They were haunted. They do not fight for territory. They fight to end the fight, permanently. You take one of their cities. They burn 3 of their own to trap you. You capture a general. His second-in-command activates a scuttling charge that destroys the entire mountain. They are not the strongest, but they are the most relentless. They will sacrifice everything, including their own future, to ensure you lose. Hana's blood ran cold. The rule was not a superstition. It was a tactical analysis. A warning about a specific terrifying mode of warfare. Total, existential, and without a single thought for surrender. The humans hadn't just been pacified. They had chosen to stop. What if they chose to start again? She took her findings to Commander Vral. He read them in silence, his aged face grim. "You understand now," he said quietly. "We won a battle. We never defeated their nature. KTH has poked a beast that was content to sleep." Hannah felt a surge of urgency. "We must stop the edict. We must apologize. Withdraw the machines from their memorial." Vral nodded. "I will speak to Kate H. Meet me on the command deck." But Kathith had intercepted their communication. He stood outside Vral's door, flanked by 2 loyal guards. His eyes blazed with offended pride. "You consort with a traitor who sympathizes with the beasts?" He spat at Vral. He turned to Hana. "Officer Hana, you are relieved of duty. You will be confined for ideological impurity." Hana looked from Kathith's furious face to Vral's resigned one. The old commander was outmaneuvered. As the guards took her, she locked eyes with Vral. It was not a plea for help. It was a message. You were right. Down on the planet, Yuna watched the silent, perfect rebellion unfold. She stood again in her garden, the rosemary now strong and tall. She knew Min's network was working. She knew Jun was waking. But she also knew the Kaldari would soon look for a cause, a leader to crush. She was not surprised when a contingent of Kaldari soldiers in full combat armor entered the garden. Their leader was not Cage, but a grizzled veteran who had served under Vral. He approached her. He did not aim his weapon. "The sub-commander believes you are the source of this." "Disorder," the veteran said, his voice low. "Come with me. He wishes to make an example." Yuna nodded. She picked a small sprig of rosemary and tucked it into the sleeve of her plain tunic. As she was led away, she saw the faces of her people watching from windows and doors. Their perfect, rule-bound obedience continued, but their eyes followed her. They were remembering. She was taken to a stark, white holding cell on Harmony. Vral came to see her. He stood on the other side of the energy barrier. He looked tired. "Your people are killing us with paperwork," he said, almost admiringly. Yuna said nothing. "Where is your brother, Yuna?" Vral asked softly. "Where is Jun?" For the first time, Yuna showed a flicker of emotion. A slight, sad smile. "Where you left him?" "In the ash." Vral's scar ached fiercely. He knew then. The derelict systems, the ghost stories of human fleets that vanished. They hadn't vanished. They had been parked. "You have called him. You broke the rule," Yuna said, her voice as calm as if discussing the weather. "You taught us that peace only comes from strength. We believed you. That was our mistake." She looked toward the viewing court, where the curve of the planet was visible. "He," she said, meaning Kate, "has just corrected it." At that moment, an alarm blared across Harmony. It was not a planetary alarm. It was a deep space sensor alert. Vral's comm unit buzzed. A frantic voice reported from the scanner room. "Commander, long-range scan from the quarantine zone, the dead system. Massive energy signature. It's a power buildup. And something else. Something big is moving." Vral looked from the scanner report to Yuna, sitting serenely in her cell, smelling the rosemary on her fingers. The cold fire in her eyes was now a reflection of the cold stars. And what was waking among them? The silent war on the planet was just the first move. The next move was coming from the dark. This response is AI-generated, for reference only. The void above the human world was no longer empty. It was filled with the sharp, angular shapes of the Kaldari battle fleet. Ships like silver daggers, their hulls gleaming in the distant starlight. They moved in perfect, predatory formations. At their heart was Sub-Commander Kathith's flagship, the Claw of Dominion. On the bridge, Kathith felt a surge of power. This was what he understood. This was order. The silent rebellion on the planet below was an irritation. But this was a threat he could crush with glorious force. From the direction of the dead system, the human fleet arrived. It did not look like a fleet. It looked like a funeral procession. There were 12 vessels. No two were the same. One was a Jupiter-class dreadnought, its hull pitted with old battle scars. A quarter of its armor plates visibly newer and duller than the rest. Another was a blocky carrier, its launch bays silent and dark. A third was a slender cruiser, its paint faded to the gray of old bone. They moved slowly, without formation, like old soldiers walking to a last muster. On the bridge of the flagship Unyielding, Jun stood. He wore a simple gray uniform. He looked at the Kaldari Armada, outnumbering him 50-1. His face showed no fear. It showed the calm of a man who had already lived in the worst possible outcome for 50 years. Anything else was just details. Kat laughed when the sensor image resolved. This is their great vengeance? Rust and ghosts. He opened a channel. Human remnant. You are in violation of the pacification treaty. Power down your drives and prepare to be boarded or be destroyed. Chun's face appeared on Kathith's screen. He looked old. He looked tired. He said only 4 words. You were warned. Then he closed the channel. Destroy them. KTH roared. The Kaldari fleet surged forward, weapons glowing. The battle began. It was not what Kate expected. The human ships did not try to duel. They did not try to hold a line. The damaged dreadnought, the Unyielding, turned not away from the attacking squadron, but into it. It took the hits, its old shields flaring. It did not fire back. Instead, it rammed a Kaldari carrier, not to pierce it, but to latch on with massive magnetic grapples. Then, from the Unyielding, 100 data spikes physically jacked into the carrier's hull. A logic virus, ancient and vicious, flooded the carrier's systems. Within seconds, the carrier's engines died. Then the engines of the 3 destroyers escorting it sputtered and failed. The virus jumped, a digital plague, freezing an entire battle group in place. Helpless, not another human ship. The Remembrance hung back. Its weapons were silent. Instead, it broadcast. It broadcast the names of every human world lost in the war. It broadcast the names of the ships destroyed. It broadcast the sounds of human cities from before the Ash Children laughing, music, the wind and trees. It played them on every Kaldari military and civilian channel. It was not an attack on ships, but on minds. On the bridges of Kaldari vessels, crews heard the ghostly sounds of the civilization they thought they had erased. Morale, that invisible shield, began to crack. Shun's ship, simply called the Final Argument, moved towards Kathith's Claw of Dominion. Kaldari interceptors swarmed it. The Final Argument did not have point defense guns. It had a gravity shear field. It activated it. The space around the ship warped. Incoming fire bent away and struck other Kaldari ships. The interceptors, caught in the field, were torn apart like paper in a storm. Cage watched, his confidence turning to confusion, then to cold, crawling dread. This was not a battle of strength. It was a demonstration of absolute, overwhelming technological and tactical superiority. They were not fighting to win this engagement. They were showing they could have won the last war at any time, and had chosen not to. The Final Argument came to a halt before the Claw of Dominion. It did not aim its few visible weapons. It aimed a different device at the nearby moon, a small gray rock. Chun's voice came over the open channel, calm and clear to every ship in the system. You broke the one rule. You believed our empire was ash. Ashes can be soft, or they can be sharp. A beam, silent and colorless, lanced from his ship to the moon. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the entire surface of the moon changed. It shimmered, from gray to a blinding, reflective white, as if instantly calcified into a perfect ceramic shell. The energy required to do that to an entire celestial body was unthinkable. It was a message written in pure power. We do not need to destroy your ship. We can turn your world into a monument. On the planet below, Vral, watching from the command center, acted. He had already taken control, placing the bewildered Kathith under guard. He opened a planet-wide channel, and then a fleet-wide one. This is Commander Vral. All Kaldari forces, stand down. Cease fire. I am surrendering the garrison and the fleet. His voice was heavy with defeat, but also with a desperate wisdom. He was saving his people from annihilation. The shooting stopped. The human ships, scarred and smoking but undefeated, held their positions. Chun's shuttle descended to the planet. He met Yuna in the memorial gardens, now empty of bulldozers. They did not cry. They embraced, a long, hard embrace of two people who had carried half of a terrible weight for a lifetime. He touched the rosemary in her hair. Then Jun turned. He walked to the stone of names. From his pocket, he took the old, tarnished medal that had belonged to the elder Li. He knelt and placed it gently at the base of the stone. A debt repaid that the Kaldari forces were gathered, disarmed. KTH, stripped of his rank, stood shaking, not with anger, but with a final, understanding terror. Jun faced them and the watching human world. The one rule was not for your protection, Jun said, his voice carrying in the quiet. It was for ours. To keep this thing we can become buried. You roused it. Our empire is already ash. We have no desire to build another. He looked at Vrail, then at the cowed Kaldari soldiers, and finally at his own people. But if you force us, We will build our next one from the ashes of yours. The choice is yours. Again. The terms were simple. The Kaldari Dominion would leave. All human worlds would be left alone. No oversight. No tribute. The Treaty of Pacification was ended. The Kaldari left. Their ships, humbled and quiet, slipped into the junk points and vanished. On the planet, life resumed. But it was different. The people stood taller. They spoke louder. The memorials were cleaned, the gardens tended with new care. In her garden, Yuna tended her rosemary. It was no longer hidden. It grew in the open. Its scent strong on the breeze. In the dead system, the human ships returned. The unyielding settled back into its cradle. The remembrance powered down its broadcasts. The final argument extinguished its terrible, beautiful weapons. Jun stood once more in the silent vault. The forges were cold. The A's were returning to their sleep. The museum was a museum again. He sat in his command chair, the screens darkening around him. He watched the final status reports flicker. Systems standby. Armaments retired. Sentinel active. The galaxy remembered the rule. The humans, tending their gardens and their memories, remembered the price. They were at peace. But in the quiet of the asteroid, a single green light on a console remained, a patient, unwavering ember in the dark, watching.